A boy walks out of a police station at 11 at night, and he cannot describe the face of someone he sat next to for 4 months. That single detail is what makes this case different from anything the investigating officer has worked before. It starts small. A student named Ethan reports his phone missing after evening tuition class. Nothing unusual about that. Phones go missing in crowded classrooms all the time. The officer assigned to the case expects to close it within a week. He pulls the attendance list, calls in students one by one, asks the routine questions. Where were you sitting? Who was near you? Did you notice anyone acting strange? The answers are ordinary until the fourth interview. A student mentions, almost as an afterthought, that the boy who sits alone in the back row was acting a bit odd that evening. The officer barely reacts. He just writes it down and moves to the next name. Then it happens again in the fifth interview. And the sixth, and the seventh. Nearly every student who attended that evening class mentions the same boy. Quiet, always in the back, never talks to anyone. But somehow, everyone seems to know exactly where he sits. The officer finally stops the routine questioning and asks something simple. What is his name? Silence. Not the kind of silence where someone is thinking. The kind where someone realizes they don't actually know the answer to a question they assumed they knew. One student says his name might be Tyler. Another insists it starts with AJ. A third shrugs and says he never really introduced himself, but everyone just calls him the backbench guy. The officer tries a different angle. What is he studying? Engineering entrance prep, says one student. No, business, insists another. A third claims he heard the boys repeating his final year of school. Nobody agrees. Yet somehow, every single student is completely certain he was there, in that room, every single day. At this point, the case is no longer about a missing phone. The tuition center owner, a soft-spoken man who has run this place for almost 15 years without a single serious complaint, is called in personally. He pulls out his admission ledger, flipping through pages while the officer waits. Nothing. He checks fee receipts. Nothing. He checks the ID copies every student is required to submit before enrollment. Still nothing. No name. No number. No admission form. No fee payment. No signature anywhere in 15 years of paperwork that matches a boy who supposedly sat in that exact classroom for months. The owner insists there must be some mistake. Maybe he attended a demo class and left. Maybe he was someone's guest, sitting in just a watch. He offers explanation after explanation, each one reasonable on its own, but none of them explain how 40 different students can vividly recall a person who technically never existed inside his own institute. The officer asks for old class photographs, the group pictures taken every year during holiday celebrations, hung along the office wall out of habit more than necessity. They pull 5 photographs off the wall. In every single one, there's a figure in the back row, slightly out of focus, partially blocked by another student's shoulder, never looking directly at the camera. The officer stares at the pictures for a long time. He asks the owner to enlarge them. The image quality is too poor. Old low-resolution prints from a decade-old digital camera. Faces blurred just enough to make identification impossible, yet clear enough to confirm that, yes, someone was sitting there every single year. For the first time since this investigation began, the officer feels something shift in his chest. Not fear exactly, something closer to unease. The kind of unease that comes from realizing a puzzle piece doesn't just not fit, it doesn't seem to belong to any puzzle he understands yet. Before leaving that night, he asks one final question to the room full of students still waiting outside. Has anyone ever seen this boy outside the tuition center? On the street? At a shop? Anywhere? Every single hand stays down. Nobody has ever seen him anywhere except that one seat, in that one room, in that one narrow window of time each evening. The officer writes 3 words at the bottom of his notes before closing the file for the night. He was never real. He has no idea yet how wrong, and how right, that sentence actually is. 3 days later, the officer gets a call that changes the direction of the entire investigation. A former student, now in college, says he still has the original photographs on his old phone, not the printed copies hanging on the tuition center wall. Higher resolution, unedited, never compressed by years of printing and scanning. The officer meets him within the hour. They sit together, scrolling through a photo gallery from 3 years ago. Class trip, farewell party, random candid shots taken between lectures. And there, in nearly every single one, the same back row, the same seat, the same quiet presence. For a moment, everyone in the room feels relieved. Finally, a clear face. Finally, an answer. Then the officer zooms in and stops. He pulls up 2 photographs, taken only 4 months apart. Same seat, same row, same general build. But the boy in the second photo has a slightly different hairline. His jaw looks narrower. The first boy is not wearing glasses. The second one is. The officer assumes it's simply a different lighting angle playing tricks on the eye, so he asks for another photo, then a third, then a fourth. The inconsistencies do not stop. They multiply. In one image, the boy's uniform shirt fits loosely, sleeves slightly too long. In another, taken barely weeks later, the same uniform fits snugly, sleeves ending precisely at the wrist. Small details, the kind normal eyes skip past without a second thought, but when placed side by side, impossible to ignore. The officer requests copies from 4 more former students, photos from different years, different batches, different classes. Every single time, the pattern holds. He brings the images to a forensic photography expert the department occasionally consults for fraud cases. The expert lays the pictures across a table, arranging them in chronological order like pieces of evidence in a courtroom. After nearly 2 hours of comparison, he looks up with an expression the officer has never seen on him before. Not confusion, concern. He explains it carefully, the way someone explains something they themselves are still struggling to accept. This is not one boy aging naturally over several years. This is multiple different boys, each occupying the exact same seat, dressed to blend into the same general appearance, spaced out just far enough in time that no one would directly compare one version to the next. Different jawlines, different hairlines, slight but consistent shifts in height, subtle changes in posture, all easy to miss individually, devastating when lined up together. The officer feels his stomach tighten as the full weight of what this means settles in. Every student interviewed swore they remembered the same person, not several different people. One boy, consistent, familiar, a fixture of that classroom for years. But the evidence in front of him proves otherwise. Someone had been swapping identities in that exact seat, and doing it so carefully, so gradually, that not a single student, not even the sharpest among them, ever noticed the substitution happening right in front of their eyes. The forensic expert says something that stays with the officer long after he leaves the room. People don't actually memorize faces as clearly as they think they do. They memorize patterns, a seat, a posture, a silence, a general impression of familiarity. As long as the pattern repeats convincingly enough, the brain fills in the rest and assumes continuity, even when the person in front of them has quietly changed. In other words, nobody was ever tricked into believing a lie. They were tricked into never questioning what they assumed was obviously true. The officer leaves that meeting with a very different question than the one he started with. This is no longer about who the boy is. It is about how many boys there have been, who trained them to sit exactly the same way, dress almost identically, leave at the same precise time every single evening. And most importantly, why would anyone go through this much trouble, for years, inside an ordinary neighborhood tuition center that teaches nothing more advanced than 10th and 12th grade coursework? That night, back at the station, the officer pins a photograph to a board in chronological order, 5 different faces, 1 identical seat. He stares at it for a long time before writing a new note beneath the case file. This was never about one missing student. Someone built a role, and different people have been playing it for years. The next morning, a routine call comes in from a tuition center on the other side of the city, reporting a strange, unrelated complaint. A parent insists their son's classmate, a quiet boy who always sits in the back, has suddenly stopped showing up, and no one at the institute can find any record of him ever being enrolled. The officer sits perfectly still when the call comes through, because the words on the other end sound almost identical to the ones he wrote in his own notes the night before. He drives to the second tuition center himself instead of sending a junior officer, wanting to see the classroom with his own eyes. It is a smaller institute, run out of the ground floor of a residential building, roughly 6 miles from the first one. Different owner, different teachers, different students, no obvious connection at all. Except for one detail. A back row seat, positioned exactly where a student will be least noticeable to the teacher and least memorable to classmates, and a boy who sat there for weeks, spoke to almost no one, and vanished without leaving a single official trace behind. The officer requests the same information he asked for at the first center: attendance sheets, admission forms, ID copies. Nothing exists here either. He widens the search deliberately this time, sending requests to every registered tuition center within the district. It takes less than 2 weeks for the pattern to fully reveal itself, and by then, what started as a strange coincidence becomes something far more disturbing. 6 different tuition centers across the city report the same phenomenon: a quiet student in the back row, always leaving early, always slightly forgettable, never officially enrolled. The officer lays out a city map on his desk and marks each location with a red pen. 6 points, spread across different neighborhoods, different income areas, different management styles, no overlap in ownership, no shared staff, no financial connection anywhere on the surface. What connects them is something far more precise than geography. Working with a forensic team, he pulls attendance patterns from each center, cross-referencing the exact days the mysterious students were present. At first, the dates look random, scattered across different months, different years. But once he aligns them against the academic calendar instead of the regular calendar, an unmistakable pattern emerges. Every single appearance happens in the 2 to 3 week window directly before major board examinations. Not before regular class tests, not before internal assessments, only before the examinations set by external education boards, the ones that matter most, the ones tied to actual printed question papers, moderation panels, and strict handling procedures. The officer feels a chill he cannot fully explain yet, but instinctively understands is important. He requests records from the state examination board, specifically asking about any past incidents involving leaked question papers in this district. The response takes 3 days. There have been 4 confirmed leaks over the past 6 years, different subjects, different schools, different examination centers, all of them dismissed at the time as isolated internal failures, blamed on low-level staff, quietly resolved without much media attention. The officer compares the leak dates against his own timeline. Every single leak occurred within a narrow window following one of the mysterious back row appearances. Not immediately after, not obviously connected. Spaced out just enough that no investigator at the time would have thought to connect a quiet, forgettable tuition student to a leaked examination paper months later. He sits with this information for a long time before saying it out loud to his team. These students were never there to make friends, or blend into a peer group, or even attend the lessons being taught. They were there to watch. Not the students, the teachers. Reviewing witness statements again with this new understanding, one detail suddenly stands out that nobody paid attention to before. Several students, across different centers, independently mentioned that the quiet boy would occasionally ask to borrow class notes, not to study from, but to photograph quickly on his phone before returning them. At the time, it seemed like ordinary teenage behavior, copying notes from someone more attentive. Now, it looks like something else entirely. The officer orders a full digital forensics review on every phone recovered from the original stolen phone case, along with phones voluntarily submitted by cooperating students who had contact with these mysterious back row figures. What the forensic team uncovers over the following days will completely change the scale of this investigation. Hidden inside ordinary-looking group chats, buried among typical study material and casual conversations, are hundreds of photographs, handwritten prediction notes from teachers, specific problem-solving techniques taught only to certain batches, seating charts, class schedules, and something far more alarming: GPS location data showing that several of these same devices had, at some point, been physically present near school administrative offices during official examination paper moderation meetings. Not inside the meetings, just close enough, at the right time, on the right days. The officer stares at the data, slowly realizing that the missing phone which started this entire investigation was never really about a stolen device. It was about what that stolen device had accidentally seen. Part 4 of 4. The officer finally understands what he is looking at, but understanding it does not make it easier to explain to his superiors. He requests a full task force, digital forensics, cybercrime, and officers from 3 separate districts, all working from a single shared timeline that now stretches across nearly a decade. The arrests begin quietly, without warrants making headlines, without anyone outside the department realizing how large this operation has actually become. One by one, young men who had posed as a quiet back row student are picked up from different parts of the city. Some are still teenagers, others are in their early 20s, all of them startled, not defiant. None of them expected to be found. The interrogations produced something the officer did not anticipate: confusion. Genuine, unscripted confusion. Each young man tells almost the same story. They were contacted online through anonymous job postings promising easy part-time income for what was described as simple observation work. Attend a specific tuition center for a few weeks. Sit quietly. Avoid drawing attention. Photograph classroom notes and teaching material when possible. Leave before certain deadlines. Never ask questions. They were paid in small digital transfers, spaced out over their assignment, never large enough to draw financial attention. Once their brief posting ended, they were simply told not to return. None of them ever met their employer in person. None of them knew each other. None of them understood they were part of something larger. Their phones contained no leaked exam papers, no direct evidence of theft, nothing incriminating beyond ordinary classroom photographs. Only one repeated instruction buried inside encrypted messaging threads used to communicate assignments. Observe. Record. Leave. For a moment, it looks as though the investigation may stall here, ending with a group of low-level recruits and no clear mastermind behind them. Then the financial trail, patiently reconstructed over several more weeks, leads investigators somewhere unexpected. Not to an individual, to a company, a registered educational consultancy, operating legally, offering something advertised as premium exam preparation guidance. On paper, a respectable business with an office, a small staff, and years of positive client testimonials. Behind that respectable surface, investigators uncover something far more calculated. The consultancy had spent nearly 10 years quietly gathering fragments of information from hundreds of tuition centers across the region. Not stealing question papers directly, which would have been risky and easily traced. Instead, collecting small pieces, teaching patterns, frequently repeated problem types, which topics certain teachers emphasized before major exams, which staff members had access to sensitive scheduling information. Piece by piece, year after year, these fragments were compiled into detailed predictive reports, then sold to desperate, exam-anxious students as exclusive, guaranteed preparation material, priced far beyond what any ordinary study guide would cost. The predictions were not magic. They were not insider leaks in the traditional sense. They were built entirely from patient, invisible human observation, made possible by one simple, exploited assumption. If someone sits quietly in a classroom seat long enough, everyone around them naturally assumes they belong there. Nobody questions a familiar presence. Nobody double-checks admission paperwork for someone who already feels like part of the room. The consultancy had discovered, apparently by accident at first, that a temporary, forgettable human observer was far more effective, far less risky, and far harder to trace than any digital hacking attempt could ever be. When investigators finally search the consultancy's offices, they find detailed files on nearly every major tuition center across the district, attendance patterns, teacher habits, years of quiet, careful data collection, hiding behind polished marketing brochures and testimonials from grateful parents. The mysterious student who started this entire case, the one nobody could name, whose face kept subtly changing across old class photographs, was never a single person at all. He was a role, a temporary position, filled again and again by different anonymous recruits, none of whom ever understood the true purpose of the seat they were paid to occupy. And the stolen phone that triggered this entire investigation, the small theft that seemed almost irrelevant at the start, turns out to contain something far more valuable than its owner ever realized. A single accidental photograph showing one fake student quietly meeting his replacement outside the tuition center gates. Without that one small theft, this operation might still be running today, hidden in plain sight, inside ordinary classrooms exactly like the one you might be picturing right now. If this story kept you questioning what was real until the very end, make sure you subscribe, because there are more real mysteries like this one.